So as for the program card, so this is your main sort of overview of your session, if you like. Again, every single box needs to be completed. So things such as safety checks required, it's not sufficient for you to leave that blank or just write something like NA or non-applicable. All of these must be filled in. If there are any things left blank, then it will be a refer and you won't get your certificate ultimately until it's completed. So safety checks required. For example, you can say to make sure that the training environment is free of any obstructions or obstacles that could lead you to trip. All of the equipment is in good working order and not broken. So things like that. Any special arrangements or adaptations to be made. For example, you could say on any given day the water fountain was broken, so client must bring in their own bottle of water today. Location of nearest telephone, location of nearest first aid kit and duty first aider, they must be filled in, and they're going to be individualized to the specific location or training location. So your tutor will take you through that. Next is your warm-up. So this is your first part of your CV equipment. So you must write the equipment. You must write the time, how long that's going to last for. You must write about your workload or target training zone. And you need to talk about that in terms of percentage of your maximum heart rate, and also possibly your rate of perceived exertion or your RPE scale. The teaching points are going to be the teaching points of that specific exercise. So on page 291 in your manuals, from page 291, you have all of the exercises or most of the exercises that you can use, and it tells you the teaching points in bullet points. So in other words, what you can do is you can put that in your own words within the teaching points for that exercise. Next is your main CV component. Now, it said that you need 3 different types of cardiovascular equipment. So in essence, this piece of equipment here in your main CV component must be a different piece of equipment than your warm-up. So for example, if I use the rower here in my warm-up, then I can't use the rower here. It must be a different piece of cardiovascular equipment, and that is also on page 291. So for example, I could use the treadmill here instead. You're going to write the time, the duration of your workout here. Again, workload and target training zone. So you might also want to talk about what type of training approach this is. So it could be an interval session. It could be an LSD session, for example, or a fartlek session. So that must be jotted down as well. And again, the teaching points are going to be written down here for that specific exercise. So if this were treadmill, you'd write down the teaching points for treadmill. Next is your main resistance training section, fixed resistance machines. So you need to select 4 machines, and they must be in order and have a logic to them. So they can be, for example, they can be big compound movements all the way down to small isolation movements, or they can be complex exercises to the most simple exercises. It can be from the biggest muscle groups to the smallest muscle groups. So there must be some sort of logical progression or logical reason behind your exercise choice. It won't be sufficient, for example, for you to have, because it's a machine, you could do a cable tricep extension here. Your next exercise here could be a machine chest press. Now what you've done is essentially fatigued your triceps in the first exercise, and that's going to have a detrimental effect on your chest press here as your second exercise. So there's no logical reason there, at level 2 at least anyway. So you need to have a think about that. There must also be a balance in terms of movement. So for every overhead movement I do, I might need to do the opposite movement here. For every push movement I do, I might need to do the opposite pull movement. So there must be some sort of balance there in your program. You must also talk about the equipment that's used, the sets and reps, so you must adhere to the Beagle scale, and talk about percentage of 1 repetition maximum as well. How many sets, the tempo, and also the necessary rest periods. It's going to be reflected in your interview process and your goal processing, whether it's going to be an endurance-based workout, whether it's going to be hypertrophy, whether it's going to be strength maybe. So this is going to be reflected in your sets and reps as well. Next is your main resistance training section for free weights. Again, 4 exercises, but these are going to be free weights this time. And at level 2, it's barbells and dumbbells. Next section is body weight exercises, and you're going to choose 3 body weight exercises. Again, from page 291 onwards in your manual, you've got all the exercises down there. There's your cool down on a piece of cardiovascular equipment. So if you remember, I had my warm-up, for example, on the rower, and I had my main cardiovascular equipment on the treadmill. Now again, for my cool down, it must be on a different piece of cardiovascular equipment. So for this one, I could use, for example, the upright bike. So it must be different to the warm-up, which must also be different to the main cardiovascular exercise. The time you need to write down, workload or target training zone. So because it's a cool down, you need to work yourself back down to a pre-exercise state. So you need to talk about how long that might take you to reach a resting heart rate, and also the teaching points of that specific exercise. Warm-up stretches. So warm-up stretches are mainly going to be dictated by dynamic stretches. You're going to want to see more dynamic stretches than you are static stretches for warm-up, especially at level 2. Now the ratio is probably going to be something along the lines of 4 dynamic stretches and maybe 2 static stretches if appropriate to the client. You're going to talk about maybe how many repetitions there are, how many sets you're going to do, how long they're going to be held for. If it's a static stretch, what type of static stretch is it? And there also must be diagrams as well drawn. So you must show in diagram form a picture of the stretch itself. You're going to do the same for the cool down stretches. Now the cool down stretches are most likely going to be static stretches or developmental stretches, which are going to be held by the client for a longer period. And what that's going to do is hopefully lengthen the muscles and get them to relax. Again, there must be a diagram there and talk about how long they're going to be held.